Coaching Inside the Box,
a youth soccer coaching podcast.
A Brit,
a Brazilian,
and an American
discuss culture and environment
and the impact it has on youth development.
Can you coach inside the box?
Hey, we made it to episode 23. I can't believe it. When we started this endeavor, Andy was younger, Philippe was single, and I was about 20 pounds lighter. This one is special because in 1985, Andy arrived permanently in Kansas City. He tells a fantastic story about trying to sell adult league indoor soccer during the 1985 World Series, the first of two World Series championships for the Royals. And the 80s was full of the Kansas City Comets, light shows, sold-out arenas. It was a heyday for the fast-paced, high-octane action. But it wasn't the big leagues. Then in 1994, the World Cup came to the United States. By this time, my family was head over heels for the game. My dad had a USA 94 hat and the matching T-shirt to go along with it. My grandpa, born in 1916, lived through the Great Depression, served during World War II, raised his three boys on baseball, football, and skipped over basketball because Cliftons were always too short. And he had a Swiss World Cup 1994 hat and wore it proudly until his death in 2009. I remember getting mail about the U.S. Soccer League yet to come in 1995. And Kansas City made the short list of the cities named to have a team. My dad tried to temper my expectations and explained to me that we might not end up with a team, son. Then in 1995, I was 11, it was announced we'd have a team, the KC Wiz. For a brief moment, our enthusiasm went to crap because the name was the KC Wiz. What the hell is a Wiz even? But then it came back. 1996 was here. We went to the first KC Wiz game at Arrowhead. And Kansas City soccer started to rise and rise and rise. We have the second highest participation rate per capita in the United States for youth soccer. But in 2022, it was announced that we would be hosting World Cup games in 2026. Andy, that's got to feel like an absolute shot out of the dark when you arrived in 1985. If I'd have told you, hey, in a few years, in your lifetime, assuming you make it 4 more years, we'll be hosting a World Cup game in Kansas City.
It's absolutely fantastic. And, I've got a memory of 1966 England. I was 8 years of age. And my dad had taken us to Ramsgate, which is a seaside town on the English Channel. And it's on the other side of London from Oxford. So we had to go back through London to get to Oxford on the day we won the World Cup. And there were fans all over the city. Everybody was out, they were driving around, tooting their horns, and everybody was wearing, England regalia, and it was a massive, massive event, that lifted the spirits of the whole country in a way that probably nothing had lifted the spirits, since, World War II, and Victory Day after World War II, and I'll never forget the euphoria that ran through the country and what it meant to the country, to win the World Cup. It was just incredible. And to have experienced that as a kid, I think that really motivated me for the rest of my life. Well, now all of the people in Kansas City that I know and love are going to have the experience of having a World Cup in Kansas City. And already my nephew has said, hey, do you have a room for me? I'm here, I'm going to get tickets.
I fielded a few of those same texts.
Right, and he lives in Sheffield, England, and he's coming all the way here because he wants to watch games in Kansas City. So the excitement isn't purely localized.
Yeah.
It's being felt probably all around the world with anybody that has a relative or an acquaintance in another country. They're probably wanting to be in Kansas City watching World Cup games if they've got any interest in the game.
And you're old, right? But you're now going to exist in the home country for the World Cup for a third time. 2 United States, 1 England. I bet your dad never would have guessed that. My son will live in the country that hosts the World Cup 3 times, and 2 of those will be the United States.
I'm really glad you changed. You said you're now going to exist originally, and then you changed it to live, because I'd like to think that I'm still living, not just existing.
Well, neither of us have had our home city host a World Cup before. This will be a first for us in 4 years. But Philippe, you have, being from Rio. Were you in Rio during the World Cup?
I definitely was.
And is Kansas City going to be anything like Rio circa 2014?
I don't believe so, but I'll tell you what, it's gonna be a blast. The way that the World Cup, obviously, I'm from Brazil, and the culture of soccer is bigger there. I mean, the host country literally stops for the month before and during the World Cup, and that hangover for the next couple weeks. It literally the country stops, and everybody is only talking about that, and the nationalist feeling from every person. Everybody really feels Brazilian and embrace the team, and expects all that, and it's just party all the time, and it's just crazy. And in Rio, we had the final, and we had obviously the some of the better games of the tournament, and it's the most attractive city to the tourists as well. So like we literally, had thousands and thousands, probably I don't know, even hundreds of thousands of tourists in Rio, and just all over the city, and people from all over, and it was fun because every week different games, and so different people from different countries coming and staying. It's just a blast, and I think that's gonna bring so much attention to soccer, and it's gonna arise the interest of many people, sports fan in general, seeing that all the sports fans, they're American. They're not just supporting their city team. They're supporting the country. So the whole country is gonna come together. Everybody that likes sports will follow. Will be interested, and the kids, sons of these people, they're gonna be interested in the game. So
I mean, it's
I feel inadequate. I do. I listened to Philippe and describing the Brazilian approach to the World Cup, and it makes me envious. The very emotion I hope never to feel, I feel immediately. He starts describing Brazil and soccer and the World Cup. It's straight away. There's almost like this, this whole completely different carnival atmosphere to the game that that is just Brazilian and very uniquely Brazilian.
well, I mean, like when England leads into a World Cup, there's excitement, but there's always this panic that we're going to mess it all up, and there's this negative feeling that goes along with the excitement. Correct?
Yeah, Green Street hoodlums type of there's always this there's going to be extreme violence, and something's going to people are going to be throwing bottles of beer at each other from across restaurants, and there's always this like negative, and I just never feel that that's even a possibility because everybody's partying in Brazil, and it's a whole celebration
Sure.
in a way that is welcoming rather than fearful.
it only happened when Argentina lost the final. Then they destroyed the whole city. It was absolutely awful. They literally tried to destroy the whole Maracanã Stadium and the surroundings. Because when Argentina made the final, Argentina has a border with the south of Brazil. It's probably like a 60-hour drive from like Buenos Aires to Rio, and these people are jumping in buses and like no tickets, no hotel, no money, no anything.
They're
These
just coming.
Argentine, they just come because in South America you can transit freely from one country to the other. You don't need a visa or anything. So just like buses and buses and buses full of Argentine people, people sleeping on the streets. Just it's the passion, the soccer passion. But obviously these people that are that crazy to go to another country with no money, no place to stay, just to see their country play in a World Cup final, not even having a ticket. Of course, they're also mentally unstable when they lose, and
Just because they're Argentinians, you're saying that.
and they're also from that place.
Hey,
that,
Yeah, talking about Argentina, and did you see that Maradona? I'm talking about coming back from beyond the grave. A whole bunch of people have just been charged with homicide over his death. I mean, this guy won't die.
He just won't go
He
away.
won't go away.
He'll never go
You know,
away.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of people that apparently attended to him as he was dying
Yeah.
that have actually been accused of homicide. They're going to face charges now. There's going to be a court case.
That's
So we're going to see this dog and pony show. This whole drama
play out.
play out. And the guy just won't go away.
That's funny.
He was a nightmare for me in 1986, and he just won't disappear.
Well, coming back to the World Cup as we transition into the youth discussion that we want to have, like I remember, I mean, distinctly, and I kind of did it in the open. Like I remember the 1994 World Cup. I have very vivid memories of the 1994 World Cup, and like I wanted to illustrate, like even my grandpa, who doesn't care about soccer at all, was engaged in the 1994 World Cup, and but it's different now. Like U.S. soccer or soccer in the United States is seen differently by the broader United States. I imagine in 1989 or 1990 when they announced the World Cup was coming to Kansas City, it was a back page bit of the newspaper. It wasn't a part of social media. There weren't numerous people that aren't soccer fans posting on Facebook about how excited they were that the World Cup was coming to Kansas City. And I mean, another example is I've got a good buddy who's gone to 4 World Cups. He went in 2006 to Germany, 2010 to South Africa, 2014 to Brazil, and 2018 to Russia. And he talks often about in 2006 in Germany, there were hardly any Americans there. But 2010, 2014, and even 2018, it was flooded with Americans that were traveling to the World Cup because they were so excited and engaged. But the 1994 World Cup was a pivotal moment for me and other people of my generation that played the game at the time, and it truly served a giant motivational aspect for being engaged with the game on a broader sense. And what it did for me won't even scratch the surface of what it's going to do for my own kids, who will be 12 and 15 during the next World Cup, or even the generation or the kids a few years behind them, what it'll do for them in terms of enthusiasm and excitement, and not just in Kansas City, but in all those rural towns in Missouri and Kansas, right? In Minnesota, in Chicago, and everywhere else across the United States. And I think that's what's kind of exciting and hard to predict what the next 8 to 12 years will look like for soccer culture in the United States.
It's going to be huge.
I think it's going to explode.
Especially huge for Kansas City. But one of the things that most people probably don't realize, and might be thinking about for the first time now, is why does a city the size of Kansas City, with approximately 2 million people in the metropolitan area, why does Kansas City get the World Cup when the next smallest city is Seattle with over 4 million population? And then the other cities only go up from there, to, massive populations. So here we've got, the smallest city by far that is going to host the World Cup. Any theories in that direction?
I mean, we've had professional soccer consistently since the 60s. Is that part of it?
Yeah, we had the Spurs in the 60s, and and that, like a whole bunch of other cities around the country that had that professional game back in the 60s, that kind of kicked off, the foreign players coming to Kansas City, because U.S. players at that point in time, were in general not good enough to play in a soccer league, a pro soccer league. So these teams were virtually totally foreigners, and so they then moved into the communities around the country and began coaching in the communities around the country. But Kansas City wasn't the only city of its size, that had a pro league in the 60s, and had an MISL team, later on. And smaller cities like, Wichita and Tulsa had professional teams, during, that era, So, why did Kansas City become this soccer central, if you like? For as long as I can remember, Kansas City had the highest number of registered soccer players, and never been outside the top 2 in terms of the highest number of registered soccer players per capita of any city in the United States. Why has this occurred?
I mean, I think it has to be connected to the professional game, though, right? The Spurs of the 60s, but then the Comets in the 80s were giant, and none of those guys made enough. They had to coach in the community, and supply drives demand, right?
Yeah, that's definitely one of the reasons, is that, that they needed to get out and make extra money, because they were paid relatively a pittance compared to pro players in other countries, and so they coached in the community, and many of them are friends of mine, and many of them, we coached against each other, and it was a necessity to pad the family budget to get out and actually do some coaching.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was definitely a contributing factor.
And without the Comets being in Kansas City, you wouldn't be in Kansas City, regardless of whether you played for the Comets or not, right? Because All American Indoor Sports and the entire indoor apparatus that brought you here and that eventually birthed British soccer wouldn't have been here without a professional indoor team in Kansas
Well,
City.
the owner of the Comets was the major financial investor and owner of All American Indoor Sports, that brought me here. So that's 100% true. Those. At one point in time, we had 2 indoor soccer and sports malls here in Kansas City, another one in St. Louis, and it was one of the reasons that the indoor game, exploded from a participation standpoint back in the day, because they were quote unquote state of the art facilities built from the ground up.
Well, and another reason might have been because even during the 7th inning stretch of the 1985 World Series, Homeboy was working the phones trying to convince people to sign up for a fun and frolic adult league at All American.
Can you show me a little bit more respect than to call me Homeboy?
That is actually,
I'm 64
I can't think of a
years-
more respectful term than that.
I'm 64 years old. Nobody has called me Homeboy in my life before.
It's endearing, I promise. I refer to my kids that way too.
but so the pro game, like another 40, 50, 60, 70 cities around North America, yes, it had an influence. One of the things that had a major influence was I'd been here a few months, and I'd already set up a camp company that went into a few states, mostly East Coast and Southern states. And and I went to the ownership of All American Indoor Sports, and I said, "Do you want me to set up a camp company?" And they said, "Sure." And I said, "What name do you want me to use?" And they said, "Well, why don't we call it All American, just like our indoor facilities?" And within a year, we changed that to British Soccer Camps. And over the next couple of decades, it became the largest camp company in the world. And what that meant was that we were importing, just for the summer, after a few years, hundreds of coaches to coach all over the USA. And they would all fly into Kansas City. There would be a big orientation meeting. And then we would send them out, via, trains, planes, and automobiles. We'd send them out all over the country to run camps, and they would go and run camps. In general, did a great job. Some of them got a little crazy in their social hours, but it was a great experience for them and a great experience for the local community. And that just exploded. And it brought every summer into Kansas City some really highly qualified coaches, most of whom had phys ed degrees, had at least a Football Association prelim badge, and many of whom were actually active teachers, just coming over to coach during their summer vacation, and when they were off school, they wanted to have adventures, and so Kansas City became the jumping off point. And then we had a post-camp meeting where we would do a post-mortem on the camps, and we'd decide what improvements we needed to make for next year. So they were coming into Kansas City, going around the rest of the country, coming back to Kansas City before flying back to England.
And let me jump in here. Let me guess, right? Because we've all, when we were in our younger years, had those summertime loves where you find a crush and you kind of fall in love with her, and then summer's over and you disappear. But these Brits with those fancy accents, right before they left Kansas City, found a summertime love, and many of them stayed.
That's exactly right. Many of them, found a summertime love, but they had an extremely fun experience, and they just really enjoyed the atmosphere. It was kind of a fantasy for a whole summer, coaching the game you love, and meeting people that were fascinated with your accent and fascinated by this new game. And and in those days, the coaches wore extremely short shorts and got a tan pretty quickly, and and so they were good-looking guys that kind of made an impact on their communities for a week or two that they were going to around the country, and it had some fantastic impact all over the country in terms of helping the game to blossom and grow and explode. But the main beneficiary was Kansas City, because they kicked off from here. They left from here at the end of multiple weeks, and many coached in the surrounding states here, and were coming back to Kansas City every week or two to pick up new boxes of T-shirts and recharge their batteries between camps and things of that nature. And so, you know, before we knew it, there were, you know, British coaches just all over this community, but not just anybody with a British accent. These were phys ed teachers. You know, these were, you know, pretty good players that could really demonstrate the skills, you know, and, you know, that they played to a high level, at least, you know, probably semi-pro, you know, in Britain. And, you know, it added to the professional player base of coaching in the community. And when you were growing up, you know, we had opponents, and every one of our opponents either had an ex-Comets player or, you know, a British soccer camp coach, you know, that was coaching their team on a year-round basis. And so very quickly, Kansas City, that was a backwater and was always way down the pecking order compared to St. Louis, very quickly we became competitive with St. Louis, you know, and from that point onwards, you know, we've had a very good statistical record. I'm talking about we being the youth soccer community of Kansas City. We can go all over the country and we come out punching above our weight. You know, for a similar city like Indianapolis, Kansas City has, and I've done the math on this, has been massively more successful on a national level, like, you know, instead of like Indianapolis or Cincinnati, Columbus, Ohio, similar sized cities, we've punched massively above our weight. And Kansas City has been the home to more national organizations simply because these people that love the game wanted to stay involved in the game. So National Indoor Championship, Super Clubs National Championship, you know, U.S. Futsal, you know, obviously United Soccer Coaches Association is based here. The NAIA, the largest Hispanic organization in the world, the semi-pro Hispanic organization, is based here. And the list goes on and on and on, because people that had great knowledge in an embryonic game, you know, wanted to make their career and came up with wonderful ideas. You know, our organization, Happy Feet Legends International, you know, on 4 continents around the world, you know, and there's no other city in the world that, you know, has this type of, if you like, immersion in the game. And of course, we've now got the National Training Center, you know, and then Sporting Kansas City, originally the Wizards or the Wiz. And you know, it's just gotten bigger and bigger. And now with the KC Current, you know, they've just opened the first purpose-built training center for women's soccer.
It's gorgeous. It's fantastic.
It's fantastic. And they're going to build a purpose-built stadium that looks, according to the plans, you know, just new age and just brilliant. And so, still pioneering after all these years, Kansas City is still out in the forefront of the game. And once again, getting the World Cup is punching above its weight, but maybe not punching above its weight because of everything now that's occurred ever since I came into Kansas City, you know, in 1985, when it was somewhat of a backwater. And one other stat, Kansas City is the home to more full-size turf fields than any other city in the world per capita by a country mile. So, you know, we literally in Kansas City never have to play on grass anymore because we've got so many turf fields, huge complexes, as well as, you know, individual high school, college fields. You know, there are turf fields everywhere in Kansas City, and more are being built. You know, Kansas City has been the home, I think, about 30-40% of the time for the USYSA National Championships, because our big complexes are so beautiful and the infrastructure is here straight away. So, you know, we're being picked for so many events. And as most coaches know, Kansas City every 4 years is the home for the United Soccer Coaches Convention.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and, you know, that's, you know, a permanent 4-year rotation that has been going now for decades.
Yep.
You know, so Kansas City is just soccer central. You know, it's not just Central USA. You know, it really is a massive, massive soccer community with an incredibly educated coaching population. And parents don't know how lucky they are growing up in Kansas City, because the coaching populations, and having run the National Indoor Championship, having been the president of the National Indoor Soccer Council, having been run Super Clubs in North America, there is no coaching population around the country that has the level of qualification, level of experience as the Kansas City coaching population. I mean, 15 years ago, I turned up, 20 years ago maybe, I turned up to coach a game at Heritage Park before some of these big other beautiful complexes were built, and I'm coaching against Ron Newman. He's coaching his grandson's team. And he's just retired as the Wizards
Philippe
coach.
doesn't know who Ron Newman is, but I do.
The Lord of all indoors. Coach from San Diego soccer's fame, and I'm just a legendary name who finished his coaching career with the Wizards.
Well, it started with the Wiz. He was the inaugural KC Wiz.
The name
coach.
of the cup on the MASL is
Ron Newman.
Cup.
That's Andy's coached against him.
Yeah, and it's funny, but we're coaching like under 10, under 11 youth soccer, and that's the type of quality that we've had, and like Vlatko Andonovski, the current U.S. national team coach for the women, and he's been coaching in Kansas City for years, and the kids here are spoiled, but they just don't understand how spoiled they are.
Sure. Sure.
It's an amazing city for soccer.
Well, we promised this wasn't just an ad for Kansas City as a whole. We wanted to kind of, one, express some excitement, two, answer those critics that are wondering why Kansas City for the World Cup, but three, jump into what's going to be kind of a series of episodes where we look at stars of World Cup past. And look at some of their development, not just what they did in the cup, but look at some of their history and where they came from in terms of how they developed, what made them special. And then we're going to kind of intertwine, weave into those discussions about specifically our coaching philosophy and why we coach the way we do. And it's not just random, and it's not because it sounds good, but because we believe it connects with the greatest number of World Cup stars and the way that they grew up playing the game. Is that a fair introduction to kind of the plan, Philippe?
That's a very good introduction.
And so this was kind of a fun text group we had this week because we were kind of like brainstorming World Cup stars of World Cup past. And there was an interesting text where Philippe was like, oh, we got to add this guy and this guy and this guy. And Andy goes, they're all Brazilians. You're not a bit biased, are you? Which was, and not one Argentinian. No, he did throw one Argentinian there, but I think it was almost just like as like an afterthought. Like this makes me not look biased.
No, Maradona is one of my favorite players of all time. I'm not that biased, and I love other Argentinian players like Riquelme, one of my favorite players to watch growing up. He killed it every time he put a Boca Juniors jersey. Or even Argentina. I mean, it's just unbelievable watching him play. It was like Zidane's version in South America, to be honest with you. And I mean, he did well in Villarreal and Barcelona a little bit, but I mean, he just loved playing for Boca. So I'm not that biased. It's just, I mean, Brazil has won 5 World Cups. I lost count. So it's hard not to get Brazilians
want to
there.
vomit. I mean, talk about rubbing your nose in it. I lost count.
Seven finals, probably like 10
poor people
semifinals
from other countries.
Only country that played in every single one World Cup. So just right there, we have more players that played World
Philippe,
Cup.
but you're just counting. England was too good to play in the World Cup until 1966 or whatever it is that they chose.
Yeah, that wasn't the case, was it? As they found,
well, they seemed to think they were.
Yeah, as they started to play in the World Cup, and they realised they weren't as good as they thought they were.
And
is there any way we can get somebody to replace Philippe on this pod? He's just like looking down on the rest of us.
And you go to Italy, they're one of their best players, Jorginho, he's Brazilian. You go to Spain, one of their better players, Thiago Alcantara, Brazilian. You go to Portugal, they always have 3 starters that are from Brazil. So, it's...
Okay, guys, I'm done.
Here you go. Well, as we look at, and we've done this numerous times on the podcast, and we're going to do it many more times to come, because we are so passionate about the approach of not the approach, but the gifts that unorganized street games provide for players, right? The street soccer culture provides for players, and that's been a bedrock, a pillar of how we as a club and as coaches have organized our structure for training. Is in this organized street soccer fashion, right? And organized street soccer really provides this dribbling or quick penetrating passing and shooting environment. But when you look at this, I mean, this World Cup list of players, if you go back into all of them, they had this origination, this start, and this fascination and this love with the ball. And so Andy's going to get academic here for a second because I'm gonna tee you up. I want to talk about.
I'm not gonna get academic,
Well,
because
You don't know what
I
question I'm asking.
well, hold on to your question because
He already has something to say.
I gotta tell this story. The other night I was in a meeting where two of our coaches were persuading the parents on their team to invest in a VO, camera, so they could capture highlights and do some post game, analysis. And they were talking about all the things that VO would measure, just by putting a sensor in a kid's shoe, and I'm literally. The VO camera would, measure the density of a player's stool. It was just incredible. The list of
How
things.
does it do that though?
Let's not go there. It's a dark subject. So
Little Johnny, your poop was fantastic this week.
but the irony is that we're getting so many stats, and it's taking away the focus on what's really important, which is creativity. You cannot measure art.
You can't specifically measure it, but I will say that the Veo cameras and the trace cameras that our teams have used, that many of our teams have used in the club, have been fantastic to document the truly unreal highlights that come from the creative players that
Right.
have developed within our creative street soccer, fast-paced environment.
And that should be the only selling point, and period. That's all that matters.
It's the motivational that is the real value from those cameras. If and I found this out with Holly, my daughter, because I'd coached her all these years, and there'd been some incredible highlights. But once they were done, they were done. Nobody recorded it. It wasn't for posterity. It wasn't something she could go back to. Let alone show her grandkids when she's old and grey. And so when she started playing high school, I pulled out my phone and I started learning how to videotape on the fly her doing moves and scoring goals and stuff. And within a few games, she'd get in the car and she'd snap her fingers at me and say, "Yeah, phone, please." you know, and she was looking at her highlights, and she would delete all the ones that she screwed up on, and she would dwell on the beauty of her drag Maradona turn and a goal she scored from 25 yards. She'd watch it again and again and again. And it was incredibly reinforcing. And she started to take off in terms of her willingness to take risks and do things that were truly beautiful, things that you can't quantify, you can't measure. It's not statistical. It's the equivalent of Picasso or Rembrandt, or Van Gogh.
Mm-hmm.
It's art,
Mm-hmm.
and you can't actually, put a quantifiable judgment to it. All you can do is say, wow, like Diego Maradona's goal against England in 1986. You just sit there in absolute open-mouthed awe of something that beautiful. Well, it motivated her no end, and that's what we're dealing with here is, we're dealing with the World Cups that go back and back and back. And so many of them in crucial moments have been decided by things you cannot measure. Diego Maradona's goal in 1986 being one of the classic examples, and Ronaldinho playing against England and attacking down the middle and doing a double scissors and drawing a defender and sliding the ball off to Rivaldo for that goal, and you just can't measure this stuff, because it's something so unique and so beautiful. It only happens once, but it's seared into your memory because it's exceptional.
And so where does that exception come from? Like where is and let's step away from soccer for a moment, but look at like human society. Where does the exceptional, the rule breakers, where do they come from? What develops that? Or is it just innate?
Yeah, and this is one of the most intriguing things because all of the great ones, you look, and I'm talking the great ones in life.
Yes.
You look at their background, and you look at the way in which they were brought up. And I'm reading a great book by Christina Di Stefano, which shares a last name with one of the greatest players of all time, Alfredo Di Stefano.
No relation though.
No relation though. And she wrote about Maria Montessori, and it goes into the Montessori educational system, but it evaluates Maria Montessori's background, and she was an incredibly swim upstream. Just go against the conventions of the day. She was a powerful woman in a day where women weren't supposed to be powerful, and she had to deal with an amazing amount of prejudice, in order to, rise above, the rest of the poppies in the field, to use a poppy field complex analogy. And, she became how do you train a child to be an expert in anything? Well, you watch the child and then you cater to the child's abilities, their sense of beauty, their sense of art, and their sense of fascination. And, you have to work with the child instead of just chanting the child into learning English. Work with them in ways to foster their imagination so that they want to read books, so they fall in love with the art of reading, if you like, and the art of writing, and so she approached education in a way that had never been approached before, in order to create incredible doctors, scientists, and working with what the kid had. And she learned a big chunk of it through working with special ed kids, because you had to be very creative about finding with kids that had autism, finding what it is that trips that child's switch. And I was going to go into special ed as a career. That was my minor in college. And it was a fascinating subject because many people that we perceive as handicapped have actually got a massive advantage, albeit in a very narrow area. They're not actually handicapped. They're actually superior to the rest of us in the way that they see things. Dyslexia being one, for example. Dyslexics are much more creative than we are, as quote unquote, not handicapped people, and many dyslexics have been incredibly successful. Well, how do we foster creativity in soccer? How do we make players, artistic?
Let me
creative?
talk about Maria Montessori and then come to that question, answer that question that you said. So for those of you that aren't aware of Montessori or the Montessori approach, the Montessori educational perspective, it's most prevalent in preschools, but it exists in older schools as well. But Montessori schools or Montessori approach is centered around really child-led education. There's less of an adult or an instructor structure to the sessions, and the kids, obviously, they're safe. They're safe within the classroom, but they're able to explore what is most interesting to them. And the teacher, instead of instructing them to go left or right, comes alongside them and helps them to explore the specific things that are interesting to them. A play to learn approach is probably the best approach. And I think the best way to describe it, and I think the play to learn and that specific term best connects with the way we coach the game or teach the game. And it's funny to say teach the game, right? Many of what we do as coaches is we create the environment and then step back from that. But this play to learn approach, whether it's in the Montessori paradigm or whether it's Richard Branson and his parents, just going and dropping him off miles from home and saying, good luck, kid, find your way home. When you give kids the opportunity to explore, to make mistakes, to go down the road that they want to go, you trip a switch within them that motivates them and inspires them to do something and look at things differently and create from there. And that approach is one that moves society forward, as opposed to a structured, rigid approach that keeps us exactly where we are.
Yeah, and most people don't even understand what a true Montessori classroom looks like. Now, part of the early childhood industry claims to be Montessori,
yeah,
but you walk into their classrooms and they don't look like Montessori classrooms. And what a Montessori classroom looks like is organized chaos. It's there's bookcases and bookcases of all sorts of fun, challenging, young child toys, for kids to experiment with, and just play with, and think about and delve into, and have adventures with, on a daily basis. And I was brought up in the 3 R's: reading, writing, and arithmetic, which I think you you know arithmetic. It's not really an R, but it's pronounced arithmetic, and the A is almost silent, so they call it the 3 R's. And
The English invented the language, and the Americans perfected it.
and invented it, and to a greater degree butchered it over time, in so many ways. But so we were brought up in A, B, C, D, E, F, G, chanting, till we learned our letters, and it was a very non-creative way of learning in general, which was very authoritarian. Teacher at the front of the room, and if you were caught chatting, you'd literally get a piece of chalk in your head, just so it's a very interesting environment, because it was kind of intimidating, and it was very structured and very regimented, and I hated it. I just did not like school. And I was a very poor student until I got to phys ed school, scraped in a phys ed school, and then I loved it, and I got great grades in phys ed school, because this was my thing.
But we talk about how culture is pervasive within an entire society, and how it forces itself on sports. But you talk about this really structured authoritarian classroom that you existed in. I'd be pretty sure to bet that the soccer field in which you trained in, and during those exact same years, was also really structured and authoritarian, with a ton of cones all about the field and very rigid structure approach to teaching the game, and the way the game was expected to be played by the kids.
Well, yeah, and I think we were lucky, because, in Quarry Rovers, my youth club, that I later began my coaching career when I was 16. My coach was a guy called Dick Folds, who was well known to be a good youth coach, and he spent a lot of time on technique, but it wasn't creative technique. We didn't do a lot of stuff on dribbling
Drive
and
a long
shooting.
ball as far as you can down the field.
There was a lot of passing and receiving.
Yeah.
It was a lot of receiving with your thigh, with your chest, and a lot of passing, back and forth. And
Soccer version of chance.
Yeah, it was to a greater degree, it was boring. The one thing that I absolutely loved is when the weather got bad outside during the winter, we had a little World War II gymnasium that we used, and we used to play 3-on-3 with benches on their side as goals, and that was absolutely a blast, and that improved my game many times, to a greater degree than receiving the ball on my chest and dropping it to my foot and passing it back to the server to be served again, another one to receive. That rote learning way of learning the game, didn't motivate me, didn't didn't make me fall in love with the game. And the 3-on-3, I could have played till the cows came home. I could have stayed there all night long playing 3-on-3, because it was just, and we ended up winning the under 12 5-a-side competition that was held in Oxford, with a real ball version of futsal. We were champions at under 12, and that was all based on playing 3-on-3 on such a continuous basis. And we were always, in the top 2 or 3 of the league. And there was probably about 20 youth teams in the league, and it was all based around our ability on 3-on-3 and transferring that into the game situation. As I look back, it wasn't because we spent hours controlling the ball with our chest.
Sure.
It was what we did ground-based, creatively, under pressure in small spaces.
But you said something that I want to go to Philippe with this segue. You said that if we'd have played, I could have played 3v3 all day long until the cows came home, right? Like, your love for that activity was one that motivated and inspired you, in part because you're playing, but also in part probably because there's somewhat lack of structure there. I was reading up on Mbappe's biography, again, Mbappe being a very recent World Cup star for France in 2018. And his dad specifically mentioned his fascination and love for the game meant that that's all he did all day, every day, was play and play and play and play. And his dad specifically used the term play, not train, not structured environment, but playing. And that's where he facilitated this unbelievable ability that Mbappe has for one, clinical finishing, but two, tight, fast dribbling. So Philippe, how does that connect with kind of how you see the game?
Well, I'm gonna say something that goes against myself in a sense because I do some private sessions with kids. But you look at all the list of players in World Cups, you don't hear anybody talking about their childhood saying, "Oh, I did a ton of private sessions. I trained a ton with coaches. I trained a lot doing this, the blah blah." They constantly mention the word play. I played a lot on the streets. I went down on the streets and played. I went to this place and played. I played. No coaches, no structure, just free play with competition with kids around the same age or younger or older, and they just played. I think that shows a lot. These players are creative, they're disruptive, they're the ones that are doing things that coaches would probably tell them not to try, and they're doing at the highest level of play because they grew up doing them and nobody there telling them not to do them. And I think that's a lesson. Not saying that private sessions or training is bad, by no means. I think it's the substitute that is very necessary due to the culture we live in, because you're not going to get a kid in KC metro area and just after school they just go on the streets and they just play until dark. That's just not the reality of the world we live in this century. And even if you go nowadays even to some areas of Brazil, you see parents that won't let their kids do that due to violence and that kind of stuff. Still, the best players, they still coming from the poor areas because they do that. They have that. So I think that's the lesson here. I think what we try to do in our club is to provide kids that structure unstructured, that as
Organized chaos.
organized chaos, as Andy likes to say. It's what's gonna make them the best, not just good. Anybody can be good. Being the best is different.
So expanding on that, the name of the book about Maria Montessori is "The Child is the Teacher," and this is the key here: is what does the child do? You have to watch the child. So, I backed up when I was a kid. My parents' garden backed up to the recreation ground, Bullingdon Rec, and I had the only ball in the neighborhood. So anybody wanted to play, they had to come and call on me. And
it was thoughtful on your dad's part.
Yeah, my dad was crazy about soccer, and so the culture, that's a huge thing. But they came and called on me, and the first person to call on me, we'd go out onto the rec, and what did we do? Did we just pass back and forth?
And you shot on each other.
One person went in goal,
yeah,
and the other person shot.
My boys do the exact same thing.
Yeah, and we played 3 and in. So the one person was keeping goal, and the person that was shooting, if they scored 3, they went in goal, and or we put down 4 jerseys or whatever we could find to make posts, and we just shot back and forth. And so we then somebody else would turn up, and now of course it was one goalie and play 1-on-1. So now we're playing 1-on-1. Somebody else turns up, and now we're playing 2-on-2. And somebody else would turn up, and now you're playing one goalie and 2-on-2, and then somebody else you're playing 3-on-3. And it rarely got to be any more than maybe 3-on-3, 4-on-4. But there were your regulars like Stephen Bell and myself. We were always out there, and a whole bunch of other people would drop in and drop out, and but we were the addicts. We were always there playing it, and so the child is the teacher. Were we doing rondos? No. Were we passing the ball back and forth? Boring. We weren't doing that. We were out there trying to beat a player in the 1-on-1 and trying to score great goals. So it's about dribbling and it's about finishing. And if you're a great finisher, you're a great passer, especially if you're doing it in a 1-on-1 and you're under pressure. You're actually having to shoot the ball into the corner of the goal under pressure. That's the acid test of great players. They're the great finishers. So that's what the kids do. And yet coaches in this society in the main don't do that when the kids get to practice. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, so I mean the verb play engage in activity for enjoyment and recreation rather than a serious or practical purpose. Right. And like I think about that, and we talk about like World Cup stars. We talk about, Mbappe, and we could go down the list, right? Through our long list of Brazilians, thanks to Philippe. We could go through that list, and they all talk about in their youth, the play is the aspect of what connected them to the game and made them who they were. I was on Facebook yesterday, and a soccer mom here locally in Kansas City was bragging about her son and his summer regimen in the off season between the end of one club season before the start of the next, and she listed it off. And I mean, it's every morning. I think the kid's 14. Every morning, fitness. He really wants to improve his speed and agility, so he's doing fitness every morning, and then he's doing some personal training related specifically to passing and shooting. And it's like 8 hours a week devoted to that. There is literally zero play in that. Zero. In this regimen in which, but this is, I think, one of the challenges that we have as an American society related to sport culture in general, but we'll use soccer as our example, is that parents think that we need to take this academic approach, this structured environment approach to give our kids a leg up. And that's by definition, if you look at the biography, every one of these World Cup stars, exactly the opposite of what we need to do. We need to get our kids playing more in a less structured environment that encourages them to lead and to play and to go for it.
Because otherwise it's boring. They lose their
100%.
passion of the game. They lose their willingness to work hard and all that. Even on the professional game in Brazil, it's a culture in Brazil since ever in soccer. The national team does that. The day before the game, it's small-sided game. The goalie is playing forward, the midfielder is playing goalie, the coach is playing, the assistant coach is playing, and they're all just goofing around and having fun. The day before any game, World Cup final. And that's how in 2002 Emerson got cut from the World Cup because he was playing goalie and he broke his arm in the preseason in one of these days before the game.
Probably playing 3 and in, I bet.
Yeah, so it's like it's even for the professionals. They need the Brazilians. They need that fun play to keep them motivated. It's not they don't spend the day before the game boring 2 hours working on set pieces. Maybe they should, because we got kicked out of some World Cups by set piece goal. But yeah, they need that fun. Imagine kids; they need to be playing.
Andy, you mentioned in our chat as we prepared for this pod, that an axiom or universal truth of soccer is that the greatest players in world history, the greatest players of these World Cups, have been goal scorers and deceptive dribblers. Right. And like, I think we can make a direct connection to Muriel Anassori from that perspective, because what you just said about your youth, your childhood, when kids would come calling and you took the ball out, you shot and you dribbled. That's the approach that kids naturally take. And so it would make sense that our World Cup stars, the best players, are the ones that did that to the greatest degree.
Yeah, and this pod is actually, to clear things up, is actually about coaching philosophy. So, we're using the greatest players as examples of coaching philosophy. And what was the coaching philosophy that led to these players being great? And there wasn't one.
It was environmental.
It
was a philosophy on a lack of structure.
It was cultural. It was environmental. It was like a natural leadership approach towards conquering the most difficult skills in the game. Excuse me. And but we've strayed away from the value of having people be creative, in order to measure something, and to have a statistic. And I was watching just a classic game between Barcelona and Real Madrid the other day, and Real Madrid had Zinedine Zidane, they had David Beckham, they had the original Ronaldo from Brazil,
the best one.
Yeah, and Barcelona had Xavi, Iniesta, of course, Leo Messi, and Ronaldinho. And so you'd look at Beckham, great passer, good free kick taker, but never really world class. In my opinion, world class looks obviously, and world class wife.
That's what made his career, honestly. Honestly.
But he was a pop star, wasn't it?
I mean, he struck a ball very well.
No, seriously, Real Madrid was in between when Ronaldinho was in PSG. They were between Ronaldinho and Beckham
Oh, really? And they chose
Yes.
Beckham.
because he would sell more jerseys.
Yeah.
So and so they really had on the Real Madrid side they had the original Ronaldo who struggled with injury and he looked in this game as though he was struggling a bit, and Zidane who really was the only truly creative player during this game, for Real Madrid. Barcelona wiped the floor with them, with Iniesta, Xavi, Leo Messi, Ronaldinho. And Ronaldinho shouldn't be last in that list because he, I think, is pound for pound the most skillful player that ever played the game. And so, and Barcelona just took Real Madrid apart, absolutely start to finish, and it was only 2-0, I think, the final result, but it should have been 10, and so, how do you develop a player like that? Because I'm not a great believer you just let them go out and play, because I think back to the games of my youth, and too often it ended up in arguments and an occasional fist fight, and and we wasted a lot of time doing things that weren't developmental. Well, a coach can, with the right philosophy, make everything so much more beneficial by organizing the creativity, if you like. So the practice has to be geared towards creativity, a shoot-in, a deceptive dribbling practice, it has to be transitional, goal to goal, so that, kids are challenged to penetrate when they've got the ball at their feet with moves and take shots and learn how to bend the ball into the corner of the net and these things. But, the coach can really add immense value and literally 10 times the developmental value of a practice if the coach has the right philosophy and the right organizational structure. But that's for another podcast.
But if we were in the Brazilian culture, I don't know that I would entirely buy into the statement you just made. But in American culture, we have to have a coach to organize the environment that encourages kids to be creative and take risks and go for it and to play in the right structure. Because, and I've said this before in this pod, it's because parents in America are not going to go drop their kids off in urban Kansas City and say, I'll pick you up at 8, find a game to hop into. We have to create that for ourselves if we're going to create or have creative players develop here stateside. And so it's a need, it's a must, it's something that we must have. But that's why it's so important for parents to find coaches that create environments and encourage kids to play and to be creative. Because if they don't do that, then they're going to end up in the most traditional or common training environment where kids are going to be playing in really a structured, rote way of learning the game.
And I'm going to pour a bucket of cold water all over Philippe's head on this one, but last World Cup that Brazil won was
20 years ago.
20 years ago. And why is that? And so Philippe, I think you know the answer to this. And so what has happened in the last 20, 30 years maybe, because we got to look at the generation that was developing when Brazil last won their World Cup, and we got to say that something has gone wrong. What is it?
I think there are many reasons, but I think after 2006, when we lost to France, that's when things started going south. We brought Dunga to bring in structure, and that's not what we needed. We didn't need structure in a sense of changing our way of play. We needed more structure in a sense of the players being focused and taking it more seriously. Not 2006, all they did was commercials for Nike and parties and advertising campaigns, and they weren't focused in the World Cup, so they got surprised against France.
But you were just saying before the episode that the new coach said something that has you excited.
Correct, but that's the transition that happened. We started going backwards in a sense that, oh, we need to mimic the Europeans in their tactical approach and, more intensity, defense, and, a more mature game. And it's been proven that it's not true. Even if it was, it's not what we're good at. Instead of focusing on your weaknesses, you gotta focus on what makes you different, what makes you better, what took you to be a powerhouse that you are. And that's what I think we're starting to realize now. And you see more and more Brazilian wingers and Brazilian forwards and Brazilian attacking mids coming along. And he said one of the things he said, the Brazilian coach, which I'm not a big fan of him, but I like these two things that he said. One of was like, I'm really happy, I'm not concerned, because if I pick wrong, especially up front, if I pick the wrong player, I'm picking right, because they're all fantastic. I have so many options.
Yeah, but are they?
Huh?
Are they? Are they fantastic? I don't see that.
I think this team right now that we have, especially because they're young, they're really young. They're like 20, 21, and I think maybe this World Cup, some of them are still too young and are not going to be able to. But if they don't get into the same old habits that Ronaldinho, Adriano, and Ronaldo and all these guys did, and their career were not lasting like Messi, like Cristiano Ronaldo was, if they keep their focus, I think we have a bigger pool of talent than we've had in the last 10 years, because I think we're realizing that we need the creativity back, because just trying to play tactical soccer, it's not working. We're not going to be more tactical than Europe. We're just not.
Here's the problem that Brazil has got. They've come back to the group, not all the way back to the group. They're still superior in terms of creativity. Their technical abilities are still to a certain degree superior. But Vinny Jr. probably is about the same age as Ronaldinho was in 2002 right now. And Vinny Jr. is no Ronaldinho. I'm sorry.
No,
he's
not even close.
Not even close at the same age. And let's look at Neymar. And compare him with a Pele of the same age. Pele had a massive impact on the Brazilian national team, and Neymar is no Pele in terms of the impact he has on the Brazilian national team.
He's about to surpass Pelé in number of goals for the Brazilian national team.
That's because they
play more.
They just play more, and they play a lot of easy opposition in their international schedule. So it's not apples for apples. So
sure, but Pelé had way more talent to help him than Neymar has ever had.
Well, and I guess that's my point. Is Neymar's creative, but he's creative in a show-off way. Pelé was creative, but he was effective. His moves beat players 8 times out of 10. Neymar now is losing the ball, 8 times out of 10. So he's skillful, but he's not focused skillful. He hasn't limited it to the things that he knows works. He's just playing out there and experimenting. There comes a point where your coaching philosophy has to be, to a certain degree, creative and practical, so that it works. You've got to have the best moves that are going to work in the game situation, not just leave the player up to discover on their own, and waste a ton of time piddling around with the ball. You've got to really have done the analysis so that you can augment the creativity with intelligent use of skill. So that skill is actually the best move for the situation you find your way in, and you've been trained in that situation and that skill until it's automatic and it works 9 times out of 10. And that's what Neymar hasn't done. And Pele's skills used to work again and again and again. Look at the other players of that era. Rivellino's skills used to work again and again and again. And, all the way through those Brazilian teams, when they did a move, they worked back in the day.
We'll have to take your word for it, because we weren't alive to watch those games.
I actually watched the World Cup final of 1970 the other day, and the amount of time that Rivellino and Pelé lose the ball they lose the ball a ton. They make a lot of mistakes. The thing is, like, they have the ball 97% of the time, so they're always trying.
Who did they play in the final?
Italy. I watched like literally every game of the World Cup. That back in those days, they made mistakes too. It's just obviously when we watch the highlights, we don't see their mistakes. We watch their things that they did special. The things like they would make the mistakes, but they would get the ball and they do it again. They do it again. They do it again. They were like legends players. They didn't care about making the mistakes, and it's just
and
a
all of
different
them
game.
had an extra level of skill. And that's what a lot of people don't realize is that, in back, you talk about the 1970 team, Carlos Alberto was fantastically skillful coming out of the back and scored a great goal against Italy in the final. And you look at Brazilian teams through the years, and Roberto Carlos was incredible coming out of the back, and Marcelo today, he's getting close to retirement now, but what a player, the goals he scored, the goals he's created. And so this is where Brazilian has the rest of the world. Brazilians have, artists at right fullback, left fullback, centre back, all over the field. They've got players that can produce that moment of pure beauty that's very effective, that opens up the defensive door and scores that one goal that wins them a game. And
Yeah.
that's all it takes. And other countries don't have enough depth of creativity, to do that, to open up the defensive door and score that one goal that wins the game. England is horrible at doing that. It's whenever they get to play a good quality opponent, it's very likely the opponent is going to beat them, especially in a big game.
I think France this year is gonna be again the top team.
I mean,
The sporting books are pointing Brazil, but I think France is ahead.
but if you look at the current French players, so many of them grew up in the concrete jungles
Exactly.
of the French suburbs, and I mean suburbs not in a positive way.
The child is the teacher. So they grew up playing
1,000%.
1-on-1, 2-on-2, 3-on-3, and creative experimentation. And this generation grew up seeing videos of the great players doing moves, so they were able to emulate videos. It's not coaching based. They just emulated their heroes and used those moves, literally at the base of their apartment block in the 4-on-4 field. And so it was tight, it was fast, it was transitional and creative. And, that's where Mbappe learned the game. That's where so many of the great French players learned to play the game, in the outskirts of Paris, in the immigrant communities.
And that's where I think, I mean, we talk about this so much on this podcast, but that's where we as coaches or parents that are listening to this podcast, that's where we have to get intelligent about looking for opportunities that encourage that creative, fast-paced play and encourage mistakes, as opposed to continuing to look for really overly structured cone monsters. Coaches.
And and going back to the purpose of this podcast, the coaching philosophy that you'll find here within the Legend Soccer Club is that we are incredibly focused on an organized way of training out of the box creativity, so that the opportunities to be creative and to conquer the more creative skills, like shooting in our soccer boxes and our wall ball, like the small-sided games on our tiny game fields,
the Maestro
skills. Series of moves, the best 6 moves in world history plus pre-fakes, and this is all out of the box stuff. This has never been written about. It's never been covered before. Facilities like ours don't exist anywhere else in the world. This is all completely out of the box stuff. And the coaching philosophy, which is the focus here, is like Maria Montessori's approach to child education. The child is the teacher. So what we've done is we've taken the proven methods of the great players, which didn't involve coaches. We've taken their if you like, their coaching philosophy, which was organic, because it was all small-sided games, and it was just what they did because it was fun to dribble and shoot. These are, excuse the word, orgasmic moments. It's scoring a great goal and breaking somebody's ankles when you're playing the game are the highlight moments, the moments that make you scream with joy if you're a player, tear off your shirt and run around the field, waving it around your head. And so these are the things that kids love. They're also the things that define the world's greatest players in history. Why wouldn't we be focusing on that as a coaching philosophy? Because we need to understand that the child is the teacher, and the great players have always come from those environments. Look at the Ballon d'Or list, and you do not see the journeyman, hack somebody's ankles and give it to somebody else player listed on the Ballon d'Or list. You see all the great dribblers and goal scorers in history listed on that list. So, we've got to have a philosophy that teaches that encourages it. It doesn't get too much in the way of it, just makes it more beneficial because no time is wasted on the fluff, the arguments that happen when things aren't organized, the fist fights and, the wasted time. Every minute of every practice has got to be spent in building that organized creativity, if you like, so that the ultimate benefits to the individual, not just in soccer, but in life and leadership are manifold and massive. And they love doing it. They're motivated to be here instead of on their darn phones, wasting their life watching reels.
I see what you did there. The king of the non-segue just segued us perfectly into the next episode, which is we're going to talk about Legends for Life and specifically the leadership emphasis that this environment and this culture and this philosophy cultivates for players. Because it's not just about having a coaching philosophy that encourages creativity. It's not just about that. It's about so much more, right? And as we as a club, stewards of the Legends Soccer Club and Training Soccer Legends approach, we all have this responsibility and have been engaged in developing kind of 4 specific pillars that make up everything that we do and really define us as an organization. And the first one is Training Soccer Legends philosophy, what we talked about today, specifically and we've gone into great detail in the episodes previous, right? The 1v1s, the 2v2s, the maestro, the box soccer, the shooting emphasis, right? That's Training Soccer Legends. That's the specific, that's the what.
And that's this book.
That's that book, right?
Yeah. And we will send our viewers
email us
a free PDF copy of this book.
Yep, coachinginsidethebox@gmail.com.
Right. So we're not just talking, without having actually done it for years and years. And then, we're not just people that have done it for years and we're letting it gonna die. We've produced the manual on how we did it, for everybody to evaluate and decide if you want to copy this, or just, take pieces of it. But whatever you do that's in this book will be massively beneficial, to your players. Because we've experimented and failed many times in order to come up with what succeeded.
Yes.
Yeah.
And next episode that we cover is going to be talking about Legends for Life, the leadership emphasis, and connecting that and interweaving that with some of the World Cup stars of the past, because there's one thing that the 3 of us are always eager to chat about, and it's World Cup. It's World Cup soccer, it's World Cup players, it's World Cup teams, it's World Cups of years past, because it's the greatest event that exists on our planet. So Andy, Philippe, another great episode, and thanks.
Hey, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Coaching Inside the Box,
a youth soccer coaching podcast.
A Brit,
a Brazilian,
and an American
discuss culture and environment
and the impact it has on youth development.
Can you coach inside the box?